The wind howled like a wounded animal across the Montana plains, carrying with it snow so thick that Jack Morgan could barely see his own hand in front of his face. He'd been riding for hours, trying to reach the safety of his cabin before the storm claimed him entirely. His fingers were numb inside his gloves, and his horse moved slowly, each step more labored than the last. When he finally saw the dim outline of his small homestead through the white curtain of snow, relief flooded through him like warm whiskey. But as he dismounted and led his horse toward the barn, he heard something that made him stop. A voice barely audible above the wind, calling out in desperation. He turned and squinted into the darkness, and there, collapsed against the fence post, was a woman. Her long black hair was matted with ice, and her thin doeskin dress offered little protection against the killing cold. She looked up at him with eyes that held both terror and hope, her lips blue and trembling. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking, "just one night. I'll leave at dawn." Jack stood frozen and not from the cold. He'd been raised to distrust the native tribes that roamed these lands. His father had filled his head with stories of savages and massacres, of settlers who'd shown kindness only to meet betrayal. For 30 years, those lessons had hardened into a shell around his heart. He'd kept to himself on this isolated stretch of land, asking nothing of anyone and expecting the same in return. The last thing he needed was trouble, and this woman, whoever she was, looked like trouble wrapped in desperation. But as he stared at her, watching her body shake with violent tremors, he saw something that broke through his carefully constructed walls. He saw his own mother 20 years dead, who, Dee once told him that a man's character was unmeasured by how he treated his equals, but by how he treated those who had nothing to offer him in return. He saw humanity stripped to its most basic needs, survival, and he realized that in this moment, his prejudices meant nothing against the simple fact that another human being was dying in front of him. "Get up," he said gruffly, reaching down to help her stand. She was lighter than he expected, her body fragile and cold as ice. He half carried her into the cabin, kicking the door shut behind them against the screaming wind. The fire had died to embers, but he quickly stoked it back to life, adding logs until the flames roared. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned and set her in his only chair, pulled close to the hearth. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Jack busied himself with practical matters, heating water for coffee and soup, checking on his horse, securing the shutters against the storm. But his mind raced with questions he didn't ask. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she out here alone in a blizzard that could kill a man in minutes? Finally, as color began to return to her cheeks and her shaking subsided, she spoke. Her name was Ayana, which meant eternal blossom, though she said it with a sadness that suggested she felt anything but eternal. She told him that her village had been attacked by soldiers 3 days ago. Not in battle, but in the night, while families slept. Her husband and 2 children had been killed, along with most of her tribe. She'd escaped only because she'd been gathering water from the river when the shooting started. She'd run, without direction or purpose, driven only by the animal instinct to survive. She'd been wandering ever since, with no food, no shelter, and no destination. She'd simply kept moving until her body gave out. As she spoke, Jack felt something crack inside his chest. All those stories his father had told him, all those justifications for hate and fear, crumbled in the face of this woman's grief. He saw her not as a threat or a stranger, but as what she truly was, a mother who'd lost everything, a survivor carrying a weight no person should have to bear. He thought of his own losses, his wife who died in childbirth along with their son, and he recognized the same hollow emptiness he'd carried for years reflected in her dark eyes. "You can stay," he said quietly, "not just tonight. As long as you need." Ayana looked at him with surprise, then with something deeper. Gratitude, yes, but also recognition. She saw in him what he'd seen in her, another soul marked by loss, another person trying to find meaning in a world that seemed designed to break people apart. Over the following weeks, as winter tightened its grip on the land, an unexpected friendship grew between them. She taught him her language, the names of plants that could heal, and songs that spoke of a world before borders and blood. He taught her to read English, shared his books, and showed her that not all settlers carried hate in their hearts. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and opening the trails once more, Ayana could have left, but she stayed. And Jack, who'd spent a decade building walls around himself, discovered that healing begins when we open our doors to those we've been taught to fear. Together, they planted a garden where once only wild grass grew, a small act of faith that beauty could still bloom even in soil soaked with sorrow. Sometimes redemption arrives not with thunder, but with a knock on the door during a freezing night, and the courage to answer it with an open heart.